Readers,
reviewers,
countrymen,
lend us your ears. And a huge thank you to all of our Patreons.
Thank you to the Pit Fighters, the First Swords, and all of the Bright Stars, Truth and Courage.
Hello and welcome back to the channel. This is Ed, I am Will, and we're here for a very exciting video. We are talking about our favourite reads of 2024. We're at the end. This is our yearly summary. We are going to be having a book awards, so hosting a kind of book version of the Oscars. We're not the first to do it, but we're excited to do it again. We did it in 2022, missed 2023, but we're back.
Busy, yeah.
But that's a digression. Already we're about 30 seconds in and I've already gone on a tangent. Anyway, this is a top 10. We're talking about our 10th favourite to 5th favourite today. But before we get into the itty-gritty individual books and why we loved them, let's just give a bit of a summary. Ed, how many books have you read in 2024?
Well, I don't usually count, but 107.
Really?
Yeah.
Was that the only time you've seen this year? How many? Yeah, we don't usually count on this channel.
No. This year, actually, I overtook you in terms of books read as a total. And
Really?
Then,
Not that you're counting.
I left you into the dust.
Oh,
it's only what
okay.
Goodreads says.
Okay. Well, you know, I'm glad as the older brother by a significant period of time, you have taken your rightful place. You should have already...
Rightful.
Yeah, because
I agree.
that is right. As only 7 years older, you've had plenty more reading time. About a quarter more than me. A third. I'm 21. Wow.
I do have a child.
Wow.
Actually, I've read more since I've had a
You've
child.
included the books you've read to her, and I know it.
True, the Gruffalo. Thing is, if you read it 25 times, that's 25 books.
That is impressive.
So,
but Ed,
top
kudos
10.
from me. You've done a great amount of reading this year. I should dedicate
How many
myself
have you
more.
read?
67.
Ooh.
I do have something in my defence. If I included the academic papers I've read, it would be about 200.
Does that mean including
It is very
newspapers?
counterintuitive. Uni is meant to get you more into education, more into reading, and yet it detracts from your reading time, even though I'm studying English and history. But again, tangent number 2. I'm sorry. Let's get back
So I
into
imagine
it.
we're not going to find any Dickens on your top 10.
No, we will not. Anyway, you read 107, I read 67, so some could say it was easier for me to make a list, but I don't think so. Let's get into the top 10, starting with, of course, none other than number 10.
Number 10 makes sense. So for me, it was the fantasy behemoth of The Will of the Many by James Islington. This book is a kind of a Roman mythology / history inspired fantasy that is not too far from the ideas and concepts within Red Rising and Hunger Games, but mix that in with a character going to school, aka university, boarding school, as it were, and add in a few dashes of a rip-roaring adventure, lots of side quests, and lots of intense sweeping the rug underneath your feet. And The Will of the Many became one of my favourites of the year. It's a great fantasy book. It's something that I just couldn't stop reading myself. It's just so exhilarating, so much fun. James Islington, that's my first book read by him. And I know that The Will of the Many is a bit of a TikTok darling. I'd say maybe a BookTube darling as well by now. But it definitely lived up to the hype for me. Now, I personally love Red Rising, and this book is very similar to that. There are lots and lots of nods, I think. I wonder if it does wear its influences on its sleeve, but they definitely felt similar, but in the best way possible. The Will of the Many was great, and I'm sure that Mare is going to be very happy that it is on my top 10.
And I'm sorry, Mare, I haven't read Will of the Many yet, but I will in 2025, and you can keep me to that. But into my number 10, Ed, it's a book we both read recently. It is The Unbroken by C.L. Clarke. We had to read this in preparation for an author chat with her, but I promise that has not made me more lenient. I've had the wonderful opportunity to talk to quite a few of these authors. That is the honour of being in this business, isn't it? And of course,
Business.
being Papa Gwyn's son, which is nepotism galore.
We don't mind.
So Clarke, lovely to talk to you. And The Unbroken, this is an epic story of kind of the conquest of a colonial empire, and they are sent to a specific region to suppress the colony that they've taken over. But whilst I said it's epic, it's also intimate in that we stay in quite a small region. We've got the grander echelons of the mechanics of the empire going on in the background, and we've got a whole range of society combated in The Unbroken through 2 key POVs who were just chosen perfectly. And C.L. Clarke, a very solid writer. I think that she's great at keeping you grounded, keeping it gritty, and she's a very efficient writer. She keeps you hooked on the event. She keeps a pace that, whilst not always sweeping with action, feels fast in the interactions you're part of and the exchanges, which there are many battles of words. And I love how this is something that also makes you think, but in a way where the author doesn't tell you what to think. They give you the questions and they let you think of the answers. I cannot wait to carry on with this series. Often with the book 1, I love it more having read book 2 and 3 because you respect kind of the seeds that are sown. And so that may be the same with The Unbroken when I read The Faithless. And then book 3 comes out next year called The Sovereign. But yeah, number 10, kicking off the list, The Unbroken, C.L. Clarke, great book, fantasy. Put it on your list if you haven't already. And also, as a little Easter egg, those arms, they are actually C.L. Clarke's arms on there. So there we go. That's a little Easter egg.
It's a great
for
fact.
The Unbroken.
Good choice, Will. Number 9 from. I don't really like to, include write any list without having Dr. Fantasy on it.
That would just seem wrong, wouldn't it?
It would seem wrong. And Return to Adan is my 9th favourite book of the year. This is just a triumph of self-published fantasy. It's a triumph of the end of a trilogy. It's got some of my favourite characters in fantasy here. And I think 2024 for me was a big year for fantasy in my life because usually I think the last couple of years my trend has been towards westerns and historical fiction. But yeah, this year made me re-fall in love with fantasy, and Return to Adan has a big part to play in that. Philip Chase here crafted such a brilliant world, such fantastic characters that were full of grim/dark esque-ness, but they were also full of hope. Something that I love in The Faith and the Fallen and all of Papa Gwyn's books, really. Return to Adan is just one of my favourite fantasy books because of these characters that you've grown, these emotional attachments to, as well as the intense action. And the last probably 200 pages I think I actually read in one sitting because it was just unputdownable. Is that a word?
That is a word.
I think
yeah.
it is. It doesn't sound
If
like
it wasn't,
a word.
it is now.
True. Yeah, I love Return to Adan and I love being back in this world, and I cannot wait to see what Dr. Chase does next. I need to listen to this trilogy now that Alan's narration is out there, so I'm looking forward to that, definitely. And I'm sure that we will see a lot more things that are seeded in book 1 that then, grow to a climax in Return to Adan.
Sorry, I was just shifting the seat there.
That's what you
Oh,
got
God,
on your own.
I'll just
time,
keep
is
that
it
on
you?
this side for a little while.
Yeah, you do
But
that.
next up, I have got You Like It Darker by Stephen King. This is his short story collection. If you told me at the beginning of the year I'd be including a short story collection in my top 10, I wouldn't have believed you, Ed. But I have got You Like It Darker, and it is, I think, like 13 or 14 short stories of varying length. Some could be considered very short novellas, others are about 4 or 5 pages. Out of them all, there is only 2. One I didn't read because I hadn't read Cujo, but I can now go ahead and read that.
So you haven't actually finished it?
That is true.
Have you marked it as finished on Goodreads or DNF?
Well,
Oh dear.
Wow, someone is really on the numbers today. It's usually me, the stat man, but you're loving it,
What
aren't you?
rating did you give it?
Let's not talk about that because it was 5 stars. But
I
you're going to
can't-
say
I personally
actually
haven't rated
you
a book
haven't
that I haven't
finished it.
finished.
Oh,
Read it now.
I'm sorry. Give me
Read
20
it now
minutes.
while I.
Yeah, Cujo is a dog. No, yeah, finished. Read that. Still 5 stars. So, You Like It Darker. It's Stephen King just proving it's actually unfair, his character work, in how effortlessly he does it. I think he's in his 70s now, and he just does it it seems without thinking. Of course, he's put a lot of effort in there. So
Well,
I'm not
age
saying
is
that.
just a number.
I know, and it proves it here. I also love that he said a lot of these stories are ones that he wrote many years ago that weren't quite up to scratch. And then on revisiting them, he's just had a light bulb moment on how to sharpen them up, bring them to the next level.
Scratch them.
And scratch them into shape.
Yeah.
Yeah, mould them and meld them. So You Like It Dark is a great mix. Some truly dark tales as well as some very humorous ones, some very funny ones, and some with a lot of heart as well. There's one in particular with a puppy. I love dogs, so it's a bit of a cheat code really to include animals and dogs
But
and
mostly,
puppies.
mostly dark.
but
They're
mostly dark. Hence the name. You like it darker, and I like that kind of breaking the fourth wall. You're talking to obviously the readers who are like, give me more darkness, because many readers are pretty dark themselves. It seems quite sick, but we do like to torture ourselves through
sick.
our book. Yeah, it's sick. Actually, that really helps.
Shame that this one hasn't got the alligator on the side profile.
Yes, that is true.
The American one is.
That is true.
Yep.
Yeah, one of the
a
rare
rarity
occasions
where
yeah,
we
prefer the American. Sorry, one of the rare occasions where we prefer the American cover. But You Like It Darker, number 9 on the list, short story collection. Didn't see that one coming.
Now, is it a top 10 list without George R. R. Martin on there? Maybe, but not this time, because I have A Clash of Kings is number. Ooh, Will, I'm getting lost in the numbers already. Is it 8? Bless you.
Number
That's
8.
a yes. Will sneezes when I'm correct. That's why he always seems.
Sorry about
he's
that.
Unwell. A Clash of Kings is a book that when I first read it, I'm a big fan of the series. Of course, I think anyone who reads fantasy must be. Otherwise, you have your fantasy card revoked. But I think when I first read A Clash of Kings early this year, I was kind of still swept up in the thinking. You're always thinking of the series as you're reading it, aren't you? Like when I was reading Jurassic Park recently, all I was thinking about as I was reading it was that scene in the film. So the scenes that were in the film. And I think with The Clash of Kings, you do that as well. As someone who's watched the series probably 5 or 6 times, then you do that. I think the more the year has progressed, the more I've grown to love A Clash of Kings, because I wasn't blown away or swept up in it as I probably should have been. I think if I read this before the series came out, many moons ago, we won't get into that though, will we? Then I probably would have loved it even more. It'd probably be in my favourites of fantasy. But do the twists have a part to play in that? I'm not so sure. But I do think A Clash of Kings is the best Game of Thrones book out there by far. I haven't read the most recent one. Is it Dance with Dragons?
Have you read Feast for Crows?
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
Well, I haven't even talked to you about that.
I think we did on the channel at some point. I was just very mid. It's just very mid, I think. Very mid. The best-selling fantasy author working today. Very well worked.
But Clash of Kings.
Working today. Again, we could talk about that.
That's a little big.
I'm sorry. But A Clash of Kings, again, as I said with Return to Adan, we're noticing a theme here. Fantastic characters, some brilliantly iconic moments that will be hailed as some of the greatest scenes in fantasy ever.
We don't have time to dive into it properly, but who is your favourite character of the Game of Thrones, A Song of Ice and Fire books?
I would say Tyrion, because
he shines in this, doesn't he?
Yeah, I mean, this is his. People say it's the other way around, but this is his before they are hanged, Glocta. Obviously, I prefer the First Law, so that's going to be at the top of mine.
Yeah.
But, seeing Tyrion, and it's just so funny and tense as well, and the ending to this book is fantastic. But I think Tyrion does absolutely shine in this book, and I think it's got to be Tyrion.
It's also my favourite.
Yeah, also.
Yeah, well, I was going to say, I read these before watching the programme, so I'd heard incredible things about Tyrion. I was a little bit disappointed in A Game of Thrones because I wouldn't say he really shines in book one. No. But then here, I understood what people were going on about.
Yeah.
And one more question, then we'll move on. Which character do you prefer in the books compared to the programme?
I don't know if there's any, really.
None. Or one that you were surprised has a much bigger role?
I'm not sure.
This is not the answer.
Not really questions I consider, to be honest.
Great.
Someone who I preferred in the book over the series.
Sir Davos?
No, not really. I think I preferred him in the series.
Okay. I was going to go on a long list, but I just checked myself.
Yeah, don't worry.
So let me just get up the 357 other characters.
Great book.
Next up, I have got in the number 8 spot, The Land of the Living and the Dead. By the way, possibly the best title of the year, The Land of the Living and the Dead.
It's a stunning one, yeah.
It just rolls off the tongue and pretty intriguing as well. Book 3 of the Ghoul Song Trilogy. This was released a few months ago, the finale to the Era 1 of the Ghoul Song series. Sean Lawless has cemented herself as one of my favourite authors working today. It's historical fantasy, it's Irish history set in very late 10th century, early 11th century Ireland, and it's got a mythological focus as well. That culminates in The Land of the Living and the Dead, The stakes are raised. There's far more action in this than the previous two books, and it works so well. Whilst giving you an intriguing and engaging political machination story in the first two installments, there hasn't been much action, but she has laid the foundations for it all to kick off in the land of the living and the dead. Great characters, you're invested, the stakes are high, and the action is executed. Get action executed. Get it?
And the ribeyes
Fantastically.
are like really tall at the top rung of the ladder.
Very nice said. Land of the Living Dead. It is a great book, hence why it's number 8 on this list, and one of my favourite series that I've concluded in 2024.
And what's great, Will, is that we have converted Chris and Mads into reading
That is true.
this series, and they are loving it so far.
There's not many feelings like getting someone else to read a book that you love and them also enjoying it. It is a rare feeling, and one that we're very happy to have provided in that sense. They have given us many good reads as well, and the latest probably will be Blood Over Bright Haven when I dive into that.
Yeah,
And
I can't wait.
inevitably send them thousands of messages saying how much I love it.
Yes, yeah, and how much pain it caused us.
Probably.
I'm sure.
Yeah, as the tear streaks on the page.
The next one for me is a book that Will's been recommending for an awfully long time. and I
Talking
think
about
he's
I can't speak recommendations to other people. We have got.
got it out your system.
Sorry, Ed.
Can you remember? Sorry, can you remember? This is on camera. People are watching us. Okay, so you need to really up your game. Sorry about that, guys. So Conor Goodin's The Gates of Athens. I'm gonna have a tongue tie now, aren't I? The Gates of Athens is one of my favourite historical fiction books of the year. It really knocked me for six at how much I enjoyed this, because as a young teenager, I was a diehard Con Iggulden fan. I lived for his Rome series. I would have died for his Rome series. I mean, Caesar, he was a great guy in that series, which shouldn't be something.
There might be a difference between
say.
great and charismatic. Or was he great?
Well, Alexander the Great. Was he great?
Probably
Was
not.
he nice? He wasn't Alexander the Lovely.
Well,
was he?
according to you, is it Fire from Heaven?
Yeah.
He was perfect. So
Yeah, but it was the 60s, Will.
yeah, that's
Or the
true.
50s.
Not when Alexander the Great was around. Just,
Very
I
true.
hasten to add.
The Gates of Athens is the story of the Battle of Marathon and what came after that. Now, we've all seen 300, but let's talk about it from the point of view of the Athenians, the political spheres.
Who have been forgotten
of-
in mainstream history.
Mhm.
It's not on.
They are the political spheres of the Peloponnese. And I don't think the Athenians get as much, of the glory, really, of the story of 300. Now, really, should the Greeks actually get any glory for the story of 300 and the Battle of Thermopylae? Because really, it had no massive effect on the Persians. The Persian people didn't even know about it. So is it just a Western versus Eastern civilization thing that's coming into play? Or, was it really the battle of the world?
Yeah, I was going to say, I forgot which historian, it was on a podcast. Might have been Dan Jones, might have been Tom Holland. Don't take my word for which one it was. But one of them said that the Battle of Thermopylae is one of the greatest works of propaganda, basically, ever. But talking about the actual Greeks, during that war, managed to turn it into a great victory, even though they were destroyed to almost the final man.
They are the best politicians
Honestly,
ever.
that's impressive.
Yeah. So we have great characters here like Xanthopus, Themistocles, Aristides, the Just.
3 wonderful POVs.
Yeah.
I don't think I've ever come across... I'm sorry. It's your book. I'm sorry. I'll let
Because you
talk about it.
recommended this to me for about 4 years, I will let you speak.
So basically, the 3 things that I love about Gates of Athens most are...
Speak,
Okay,
not rap.
I'll keep talking.
Go on, Marshall Mathers.
I love that the 3 POVs, they have a great balance. They're very different, and I don't prefer one over the other.
Yeah.
They all feel equally important.
But if you took one out,
The others
oh,
wouldn't be
they
as
would drop.
important. It's
Exactly.
their relationship together, and how each seems a bit like a villain in the other's eyes.
It's yin and yang and young, isn't it?
Yeah, they all seem like villains in each other's eyes, but when you see it from their own perspective, you're like, you know what? He's right.
Which we love.
He's
That's
right.
what I love reading in books.
Mhm.
But I don't think I've read a historical fiction like this. Now,
No.
it's not really bogged down in the details. It's more about the characterization and seeing this really, massively important and this phase of the Greeks, of the Athenians at this time in the world. I mean, what these people, the fact that we know about these people today, the fact that their words have such a big knock-on effect on, just any kind of philosophy minded person, people who are interested in reading about these characters, these people, it just shows how important this period was. And seeing these three characters, seeing the focus that Conor Gooden had on just their characters alone, rather than maybe what lots of historical fiction writers focus on, which is a really, how do I put it, maybe a story that doesn't quite do them justice, maybe a story that kind of gives the reader some exhilaration but doesn't really give the historical people justice. Conor Gooden does, and I think The Gates of Athens is a wonderful book. It has real moments of gravitas. It's a really important book to read, I think, and it's Conor Gooden at his best. There have been a few books that I've read by him the last few years that just haven't really scratched the itch for me, but this was a return to form, return to bronze, I would say. The Bronze Storm was beautiful here, and I loved The Gates of Athens. If you want to read a really fast-paced historical fiction that feels punchy, that feels really deep as well, it's got an emotional depth to it, then please pick this up. And there are one book or a couple of books that come after.
Yes, yeah, and I was going to say that after reading Gates of Fire, I thought I probably won't read Gates of Athens because it also deals with Thermopylae. You can't beat Gates of Fire, which you can't beat Thermopylae in Gates of Fire, but don't let it put you off reading Gates of Athens. If you've read this, it's a very different story, but one that you love to see from a different lens.
I think if Conor Gooden wrote Thermopylae, tried to take that on, I don't think it would come close to Gates of Fire. But I love how he shifted the angle, and I was thinking about that when you were talking about the land of the living and the dead, which I will talk about. Oh no, in the next video. But basically, what I was going to say was you're seeing that familiar, maybe culture, familiar character, or maybe a familiar story beat, but you're seeing it from a different angle.
Yeah.
So that's why Thermopylae, from the Athenian point of view, works so well with Gates of Fire.
That's the thing we need to see more in history from a different perspective.
Hard agree.
Very nice, Ed. And number 7 for me is, a book we've already talked about today, Return to Adan, Dr. Philip Chase. He's back, book 3. Each book in this series got better and better, in my opinion. I love that The Way of Adan, of course, Philip Chase, very inspired by Tolkien, but modern fantasy as well. You could see that in The Way of Adan, the way he talked about nature, his approach to the beginning, that Shire feeling, the being in the village, seeing someone happy. It's not something we see often.
And seeing green grass.
I know.
It's a rarity.
It's lovely. And Philip Chase has a very unique way of describing nature, which I've only read one Le Guin story in Earthsea, but it felt a bit like that in kind of the ethereal feeling, tone and atmosphere that was provided.
It felt like Dr. Chase has a passion for that world and that falling in love with a landscape, a world, as well as the characters.
It's almost like he's inspired by Gwyn and Tolkien and texts like that.
Yeah.
Interesting. But each book in this series, I think, gets better and better. I loved The Way of Adan, but Prophet of Adan kind of took epic fantasy in a new direction, and it ends in a way which you would often expect the final book in a series to end, which I trusted in him, but I was a bit baffled. Like, what is going to happen in book 3? Of course, there were many threads to continue, but kind of that big showdown we expected may have happened already. So, book 3, I had no idea what to expect, but oh my, Philip Chase takes us on a journey. Usually with a final book, you kind of want to know what you're expecting because then it's really satisfying when those moments pay off. Philip Chase somehow finds a way in which I couldn't name any other author does the finale of a series. He gives us almost 2 endings that are equally as powerful.
Very cinematic.
Incredibly cinematic, but still almost a more intimate story than book 2, but keeping the high stakes that we love in epic fantasy. I love the mix of keeping those traditional classic fantasy motifs and themes and core elements such as hope, but then bringing in some grittiness and seeing each side are being right in their own way as well. Return to Adan, wonderful work, wonderful series. My favourite indie published series.
Another great historical fiction entry is a one that I have been probably quite terrified to actually read, and it was Arthur by Giles Christian. This is the 3rd book of the Arthurian trilogy. that I think sprouted as a standalone of Lancelot, and
It
then
did.
it just grew and grew and grew, hopefully in popularity, because Giles Christian deserves all the popularity in the world. But also, I think Giles became so attached to these characters and this world as well. And Arthur holds a keen place in his heart. And I will say, in the first two books, Arthur was probably always my least favourite part of Lancelot and Camelot. I always loved the side cast, I always loved the other characters. And I felt like Arthur is such a hard character to write. Like, how do you do a character of that gravitas justice? It's like try writing Alexander the Great, like we said about Mary Renault.
But even harder because the amount of adaptations.
Exactly.
Imagine unique as well.
Writing something about Robin Hood and those characters. But Arthur is someone who there are so many kind of ways of writing about him, and his characters on the screen in different books, from children's films all the way to TV series. So it's a big task, and obviously this book is about Arthur. What I love is it's about Arthur after the glory days, and Giles just crafted him absolutely perfectly, and he is my favourite part of this book. And it makes you really reconsider those first two books, because you've seen, as we're talking about, you're seeing this character but from a new angle, which those books did. You're seeing him from Lancelot's point of view and then someone else's point of view, and then in book 3 we follow Arthur, and
Very nice. Yeah,
it's beautiful. There are some incredible moments. I love how intimate this feels. It feels a little bit like the film Logan, the Wolverine one, and I love that style of story. It really hits home for me, where you've got this grizzled character protecting a child, and it's just masterfully done. Now, Giles Christian's a writer who I will always love reading his prose. Like, he could write about someone just picking a flower, and I would just want to read pages and pages of it. But seeing him write from, the third book in a series where he's built up so much, and it's such a climactic story, and then the intensity and the intimacy of it, there are some seriously emotional beats here that still have me thinking about them today. And I read this in the summer, so nearly 6 months ago. Arthur, an incredible book. Please read the Arthurian trilogy by Giles Christian.
And I also have Arthur as my number 6 spot. I won't go over what you said.
We are so similar.
We are, aren't we, Ed? Look, we like the Weasleys. Oh, that was a good sound. But so I won't add on to I will add on to what Ed's saying, but I won't repeat what you said. I'd just like to clarify, these are companion tales. Lancelot, Camelot and Arthur are self-contained stories, but they link to one another. So you could read any one of them. You can read one and it is a satisfying self-contained story.
Read them all, though.
But I would recommend reading them all. Arthur, you get 2 timelines. One of Arthur as a boy, and then a man called Beren, who is brought into kind of the future of England, a last hope of England. Giles Christian, always a lyrical writer. He delivers again with Arthur, and I'd say this is his most thematically poignant and powerful book. There are some incredibly moving scenes, and Giles Christian doesn't give you a fairy tale ending. He doesn't give you a fairy tale beginning or middle either. It is hard-hitting and gritty throughout, and that's what I really love with this Arthurian retelling. I love the grittiness in the Warlord Chronicles, and I love that is taken to Giles Christian's take on the Arthurian legend, but in a very fresh way as well. Giles Christian, he's just one of my favourite authors. Arthur, I've always loved the Arthurian legend, and that makes me read more Arthurian text, but it also, I think, means that I have a higher bar of expectations, and so for everything to be ticked off the list is a feat unto itself, because I think I can be overly critical of Arthurian works, and I have of adaptations as well.
Fanboy.
Yeah, I think I need to be a bit more lenient on things sometimes when it comes to Arthur, but I didn't have to be with this because it just cleared every benchmark I had.
There was no
Actually, I would have done it differently, or that was done better here. Yeah. Really not. And as I've said, repeat myself, Giles Christian, wonderful author, and he delivers, as Ed would say, like a postman. Oh, I stole the joke. He delivers like a great postman with
some
Arthur.
Sort of Dark Ages postman. What would they look like?
I wonder. Probably armed with a few weapons.
Riding a horse.
Probably that as well. So yeah, number 6 for the both of us. And now, Ed, on to the final book that you're talking about in this video.
I was going to ask you, Will, are we doing is it number 5 as well? But so be it. Another fantasy book, and how good it feels to have a David Gemmell book on this list. Now, Ravenheart is the 3rd book of the Regante series. Now, I've always considered, I think lots of people do as well, the first 2 books in the Regante are a duology, and then the second 2 books are a separate duology, and they are linked by, I think it's like thousands of years, isn't it? Is it thousands? I think it
yes.
is. It's 800 years.
Or 800, yeah.
Yeah, almost.
I wasn't going to say 100, but I was thinking it's close to the millennium mark.
Yeah, so it's 800 years have passed since book 2 in the Regante. Now, if you guys know me, which you might do, you might not do, but the first 2 books in the Regante are all possibly my holy grail of fantasy. They are just some of the best works ever written. There are 2 incredible characters. Well, I would say 3 characters that kind of top the fantasy lists for me, which is Conovar, Ruathane, as well as Bane the Bastard. And all 3 of them were perfect in those 2 books. Then I always wanted to read the latter 2 books in the Regante, but I was quite scared, Will.
When the first 2 books reach these lofty heights, and kind of conclude their own story.
How can you top it? Now,
exactly.
The 4th book, Stormbringer, doesn't quite touch any of these 3.
Mm-hmm.
But Ravenheart is a new favourite of mine, particularly because of one character called Jaime Grimoak. And Jaime Grimoak has catapulted onto my favourite fantasy characters list. I think he kind of reminds me of Papa Gwyn. He's like got this really warm, caring, sensitive heart, but he is fiercely loyal. He is someone who would die for his friends, for his family. He would literally do anything that they asked of him, and he is just a really special man. And I do think David Gemmell had a way of writing masculine characters that really touch my heart, and I think they are incredible role models. You know, I wish I read these, you know, as a teenager or as a boy, because I think I would have, you know, connected to them even more, even though I still love them now.
Well, I was going to say, do you know who inspired the character?
I think is it his stepfather?
His stepfather, who also inspired what other character?
Druss.
Druss.
Yeah. So David Gemmell had a great stepfather, is what we're trying to say, basically. If he's anything like Jaime Grimoak, then he's like Papa Gwyn. And yeah, Jaime Grimoak on the cover there with his eye patch. It's a phenomenal book. I haven't even spoken about what is so great about it, but it is... Imagine the story of Rob Roy, which is where you have these peoples who have been almost banished from their own land. They're not allowed to wear their colours. They're not allowed to wear cloaks, you know, in the colours of their ancient Celtic peoples, of their ancestors. Everything about their culture has been stripped down to the ruling people just trying to get money out of them. Taxes, trying to get them to be their slaves, basically. And just ruling over them in such a violent way. And
change the British for a Roman-inspired culture, and then change the Scots for the Regante.
Yeah, but they are very much like Scots. They even dress like them. They, as you can see there,
some historical inspiration coming in there. I think.
And there are lot of language used in this book that reflect that, because David Gemmell was someone who was heavily inspired by historical periods. So it's 1700s Scotland, I would imagine it as. I love historical periods set in, you know, in fantasy worlds where you can see this inspiration on the sleeve, as it were. But David Gemmell, as I said, crafts great characters, fantastic action, and so many moments for these characters to reach lofty heights. Whereas sometimes I notice in lots of books and lots of series where they craft these really fantastic characters who you're always invested in them, but then they don't have them do things that are remarkable or do things that show off their character even
the full
more.
Potential.
Exactly. And Jaime Grimoak is someone who is, you know, he's written to the max.
Yeah, one of the best 10 scenes I've ever read is near the end of this story.
Yeah, and he's Pepsi Max. He's Pepsi Max. To the max.
Oh, dear. Oh dear.
Oh well.
Oh dear. This is actually the first video we've recorded together for 2 months.
It's been a while.
Because we've recorded separately via Zoom.
They don't really count, do they?
But yeah, first one, so it's good to be back, Ed. But the last book today, we've done that 3 times this video.
Yeah,
it's just good to be back. It's just good to be back. Last one that I'm talking about today is The House of the Golden Door. The number 5 spot is claimed here. The second book in the Wolf Den trilogy. Another series it's great to see Chris and Mads have picked up. This is historical fiction set in Pompeii in the 1st century AD. We follow Amara as she continues on from book 1, obviously. I was very worried.
We're really good at this.
We're good.
We've also
good.
been doing it.
Insightful, I think I am. So, at the end of the Wolf Den, there is something that happens, which means that the scene, tone and atmosphere, and evolution of book 2 is going to be very different from book 1.
Yeah, well, you could say that.
So, I was quite worried in that a lot of what I love about book 1 might not be present. But wow, Elodie Harper just showed she is a writer.
You think too much.
I do.
You do need to stop worrying.
I know. No more worrying, and I won't be in the case of Elodie Harper because she has proven her quality as a writer in every respect. I cannot wait to see what she does next.
I think is it Boudicca's daughter?
Boudicca's daughter, which
Cleopatra.
Boudica, and then Antony, Antony's wife.
Oh, that's gonna be
Oh,
great.
I've forgotten her name. That's terrible. Anyway,
Oh,
House of the Golden
name?
Door is, as I said, 1st century AD in Pompeii. Amara continues political machinations, but as a character who she isn't the most adept at it naturally. It doesn't come naturally to her. She's not a schemer. She's not a deceiver. And what she does is justified for the greater good of those that she loves.
We know that phrase, don't we?
The greater good is a theme and a saying that we see in so many books, but it's so powerful because it is how many people run in life, that they may commit minor misdeeds or great misdeeds for the greater good of themselves, or justifying the means through those that mean a lot to them. And that is played upon in this story. And there's also a romance, one of the best romances I've ever come across. It feels natural and organic. It grows like a flower and it flourishes, but in a way where you're just scared it's going to be stomped on the entire time.
Yeah, because of the lack of agency through these characters, something can happen to them at any moment and they are completely powerless. It's not like, it's like Orca in the Bloodsworn, who can probably fight her way out of anything. These characters are completely just hopeless.
I know.
They?
Yeah, it's terrifying.
And there are, probably, if any, not many swords really are there in this series. Which,
but there is constant
shows that it must be really good if we're recommending it.
But there is constant danger, and it is a book that also made me cry. So there we go. Last book I'm talking about today, a tearjerker, one that moved me. Wonderful writing. Everything is top notch.
And that was my book 2 of the year in 2022. So
2022?
Yep, when we did our awards last time.
2022?
Dreaming the Eagle was number 1 and The House with the Golden Door was number 2.
That's crazy. But I've caught up now and I did introduce you to the series.
No,
but anyway, little snippet into arguments when the camera is off. Yeah. But there we go. That is our 10 to 5 for the favourites of 2024. Yet? You know what, Ed? I think people are bored of you repeating yourself.
I don't think anyone is.
2025 is
missed the live ships digging.
2025 is the year for live ships. But that is our video, the first half of our favourite reads of 2024 so far. Please keep your eyes open for part 2, which I believe will be the last video of the year.
Really?
Think so?
I don't think so.
I think so.
I don't think so.
Maybe.
We've got a lot to do. Maybe. Anyway, Truth and Courage, thank you for listening to us bicker. The Brothers Gwyn.